We are joined now, I'm pleased to say, by Paul Dennett, who is a cricket writer and broadcaster. Hello, Paul, you all right?
Hey, Tom, how you going?
I'm all right, thank you very much. Cheers for joining us. Really keen to get your view of how it's gone down in Australia. But first, can you just explain the background to this? What's happened?
Well, basically, Australia was struggling to get the ball to move in the Test match against South Africa that just occurred overnight, Australian time. And Cameron Bancroft, the Australian player, was seen with a yellow sort of small square in his hand that he then vigorously sort of rubbed his hands over the ball, and then you could see him putting that square back in his pocket. There was then what appeared to be communication from the Australian coach to the sidelines to Peter Hanscom, one of Australia's reserve players, who then went out onto the field and spoke to Bancroft, who then took that, what later transpired to be some tape, and put it into his underpants, basically, as a means of trying to hide it. Then when the umpires confronted him, he looked like he pulled out a sunglasses cover and indicated that that was what was going on. The footage, of course, was damning. After the play was finished, in the press conference, Australian captain Steve Smith and Cameron Bancroft admitted to what they'd done, that he'd used that piece of tape to try to get dirt to adhere to it so that he could then rub it against the ball, which is obviously completely against the laws of cricket and the spirit of cricket. And Steve Smith said that it was a decision that the leadership group, we didn't specify who was in that, but that group was aware of it. He said that the coach was not aware of it, and they were absolutely contrite. And Steve Smith at that stage said at this stage saying that he's not going to step down as Australian captain. And as you can imagine, it is the only story on the Australian news at the moment.
And how has it gone down? What's the reaction been among Australian sports fans and journalists?
Universal condemnation. I've never seen an incident like this. Normally there's a sort of a range of opinions on this one. It's shock. I think it's regarded already as being one of the darkest days in Australian sport. That's how seriously it's being taken. They're on Channel 9, they have a regular sports show at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And at this time of year, cricket would barely get a mention because the rugby league and the Australian rules football seasons have just started. It would have normally got a mention 40 minutes into the show. I watched the first 3/4 of an hour. This was the only topic for 45 minutes. And Michael Clarke, ex-Australian captain, was on there almost in tears as to what has happened. And I think there's a general viewpoint in Australia that there needs to be some really serious punishment meted out.
I'm interested, it's Nick here in the studio, Paul, a couple of things that come to my mind, reading a little bit of the reaction from down under. One thing that really struck me is that people were saying this was the most sort of shocking or shameful incident since the underarm incident, which feels a little bit like a million years ago. I'm sure many of our listeners will remember that famous Trevor Chappell underarm delivery. And that kind of resonated as goodness. This is the biggest thing this is really big. The other thing is that I noticed I saw a very little bit of that Channel 9 appearance from Michael Clarke, and he was saying, in a way, it was particularly bad. Almost they took advantage a little bit of the younger guy in Bancroft, who's only playing in his 8th game, so he's pretty inexperienced, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the 2 points there that are very valid. One, lots of people are comparing this to the incident back in 1981, I think it was, when Greg Chappell ordered Trevor Chappell to bowl an underarm ball along the ground. New Zealand needed a 6 to tie the game, not even to win, and that was off the last ball. And so by rolling it along the ground, it was ensuring that they couldn't get a tie. I honestly think that it's almost even worse than that, because at the very least, that was still within the rules of the game at the time, even if it was completely against the spirit. And Greg Chappell, the Australian captain, afterwards said he had a shocking time. He had one snap and it was all over. This seems to be a concerted attempt to cheat, and yeah, I think it's worse than that incident. At the moment, it's certainly being treated very much with the same level of condemnation. And yeah, and Cameron Bancroft, as you say, very young player. He's not going to say no to anything that's being asked. But I don't think that he can be given too much sympathy either. He's an intelligent person who's been given all sorts of training. He needed to have the guts to say, no, I'm not going to do this.
Daniel Adams is an Australian. He's tweeted to say the Australian public and the press are unanimously calling for them to go. They're already done. They just haven't realised it yet. And Dave Kellner says that Steve Smith press conference is beyond belief. How can he possibly think he can continue in his position? The whole team will be tainted throughout their careers from the very next ball. His position is certainly untenable. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think with regret, I think I do agree. I think that I can see why Steve Smith in that position was trying to sort of still say the right things because it was happening so quickly. But the rest of the world is just going to look at this and say, well, we've always thought Australia wasn't necessarily the nicest team, but we respected them for their ability on the cricket field and we knew that they wouldn't cheat. Now that that has completely changed, I think that in order for Australian cricket to sort of salvage some sort of form of reputation out of this, there needs to be swift, decisive action from Cricket Australia. And if we need to have several of our top players missing from the team for several test matches or whatever, a long enough period so that the rest of the world realise that we do treat this as an absolutely shocking event, I think that the coach's position, Darren Lehmann, is probably untenable as well. I think that maybe we need Ricky Ponting or Justin Langer or someone else to take over and sort of sweep a broom through things and draw a line in the sand.
But why, Paul, Darren Lehmann? Smith said that this was not anything to do with the coaches. Do you believe that? Is there any way that actually the leadership group, as they describe, could have done this without the coaches knowing?
I suppose the point is that if they have done it without the coaches knowing, then you'd almost say that in itself is a concern, that the coach is so out of touch with what's happening in the side. And also, I suppose I'd look at it like in most sports, when something this bad happens, that the manager or the coach is the one that has to bear the brunt of it. And so, I'm not sure whether Lehmann was involved or not. You can only take Smith at his word at this stage. But even so, I think that in order for the rest of the world to realise that Australia is taking it seriously, then his position must come under extreme scrutiny. How
long do you think that he will get banned for, if there is indeed a ban, as you would hope there is?
Well, I think there's probably two issues. One is that the ICC, the International Cricket Council, as far as I know, the ban for tampering with the ball is a 3 or 4 demerit point situation. If you get 4 demerit points, you miss one test match. So I'd imagine that's possibly what would happen to Cameron Bancroft. But I would also think there must be some clause in there about bringing the game into disrepute and whatever else, that maybe that they would mete out a more serious punishment. But I also hope that Cricket Australia will say, well, okay, that's their punishment, but we're going to impose our own punishment as well. And I think that it needs to be several test matches, whether it's a period of months or whether it's just several test matches. It needs to be enough that for the next few games, the Australian team is going out there with, several key players missing.
Hi, Paul. Do you think the fact that this has happened, and the fact that it's so shocking, is there any suggestion that it might have happened before? Like the fact that a senior player could do something like this. It's not his first rodeo. He knows how to win a cricket match. Is there any concern that this is going to bring Australian cricket more generally into disrepute, and there needs to be a large-scale inquest now into their previous games?
I think there's definitely that concern. Steve Smith has said that this is the first time that it's happened. Plenty of people won't believe him. There's already people talking about, great spells of bowling in the past where Australians have got prodigious reverse swing. Do these now come under question? Other people have said, isn't it strange that in the first couple of test matches where they got lots of reverse swing, and according to what they're saying, they didn't tamper with the ball, yet now they've needed to start to tamper with the ball. Why is that the case? Other people are saying, wow, isn't it unlucky that the very first time they tried it, they got caught out? I don't know. I think there is a possibility that it is the first time, but I think you'd be naive to not have to ask questions about prior behaviour.
What about cricket in general? Does this leave us worried that actually it's going to affect the popularity of cricket around the world, not just in Australia?
I don't think so long term. I think that it does highlight a problem that cricket has, that the pitches are so benign and the ball is not moving as much as it used to traditionally, so that bowlers are almost left with only this reverse swing, which is a very strange situation where you're deliberately trying to throw the ball into the turf, do all sorts of things just short of ball tampering to scuff the ball up, and then have it reverse swing. That I think it shows that we need to give bowlers more traditional things in their armoury to help them succeed, rather than having to rely on doing these sorts
of things. On that, Paul, Zing tweets to say ball tampering shouldn't be considered such a heinous crime. In fact, it should be legalised to allow for a better balance between bat and ball. It's too far advantageous to batsmen these days. KT also tweets at Talk Latch to say, for those of us who don't follow cricket, can you explain why this is such a big deal? I thought all cricketers did it like cheating in football.
Well, I think that the big deal has been that you're introducing a foreign object into it. That cricketers rub the ball on their trousers, they rub the sweat into the ball, and there's been issues in the past where cricketers have been sucking on mints and have put their saliva onto the ball. That has been deemed to be across the line, but only just. This seems to be an outright level of taking it to something that's been considered completely unacceptable. It has happened in the past. Mike Atherton, the England captain, 1995, had some dirt in his pocket that he was scuffing on the ball. But the reason it's such a significant thing is that you go from a situation where you're struggling to get the batsman out and the ball's just going straight up and down, and all of a sudden, when it does start to reverse swing, the game changes completely. Batsman can't lay a bat on it, and suddenly the bowling side has a colossal advantage.
Paul Bell has tweeted us, Paul, to say, England's Barmy Army tweeted, he pointed out to me, he said, we picked a good week to get bowled out for 58.
It's not the biggest show in town, is it?
I don't think they're linked, Paul. Listen, Paul, you've been absolutely brilliant. It's been really great to get an insight from Down Under, so thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks.
All the best. That's Paul Dennett there, a cricket writer and broadcaster, bringing the latest on that ball tampering row. Not row, is it? It's happened. It's a crisis for Australian cricket.